8th work session of the Salt Lake City Council. The first item on our work session agenda today is an informational presentation about demographic and migration research from the Gardner Policy Institute. We have Pam Perlich, the Director of Demographic Research for the Policy Institute, and Emily Harris, a demographer. So if you could join us at the table, and I will turn the time over to both of you.
How awesome.
Thank you.
Thank you for inviting us. I guess we don't need this.
Like stand and...
I believe we sit.
Okay. Maybe you just don't want to have to use the mouse.
This is the important point.
Oh gosh.
Where's the handout?
I'm so sorry. I was trying to figure out what exactly is going on here.
What is exactly going on here?
There's the migration paper and everything too.
I'm so sorry.
Well, you know what? I can begin without the slides if you're okay with that, or...
Oh, there it is.
Okay. Can you remind me of the time that you would like for us to... What's our boundary?
Yeah, so you have about, we have 30 minutes agendaed
Okay.
for you, so
Thank you.
you're welcome.
First of all, do you want me to start?
Yeah, if you just want to introduce yourself, introduce each other, and...
Well, I'll introduce... No, I'll
There you go.
introduce myself.
Yeah, you could, yeah.
I'm Pam Perlich. I direct the demographic research at the university's Gardner Policy Institute. Thank you so much for inviting us.
I'm Emily Harris. I'm a demographer at the Gardner Policy Institute. I work with Pam in the demographics team.
Thank you for inviting us. You betcha.
Also, I'm going to try to not cough into this a lot, so...
So we have a two-part presentation for you. First, kind of a high-level update on where we are on some of the demographic work, and then a deeper dive into a recent paper on migration that Emily and I did together. First of all, if there's one thing and only one thing that you remember about us coming and visiting with you today, it's extraordinarily important that we get a good count in the Census 2020. I know that you recently hired Haley Leak at the city to be your point person on Census 2020. There are many layers of preparation for the decennial having to do with address lists. We have folks at our institute, our colleague Mallory Bateman, working on Census 2020. But we look at who are the hard to count populations: minorities, new Americans, LGBTQ people, homeless people. Which city in the whole entire state has the greatest proportion of those folks? We do. So we've got to really focus. Anyway, this is tied to all of your federal funding formulas, state funding formulas on sales tax distribution. I mean, I can go on about the money. It's also about political representation, how you draw your city council lines, and school district lines, and all the way about political representation. And then for us as analysts, it's extraordinarily important that we get the good starting point, because we only get it once every 10 years. And if we're underrepresenting the populations in the data, we have the legacy of that in the less representation and the less funding, but we also have that in the less people in the data. Think for a minute what it would mean for a rate of influenza, a rate of crime, or anything. If you underrepresented people, it looks like those rates are much too high, right? So to get an accurate picture of our communities and how they're changing. So just to remind you, according to the Census Bureau estimates, this is the first time the city's ever eclipsed 200,000 people. If we get a good enumeration, I wouldn't be surprised if we were at 225,000 people in the decennial. The way the housing is going in, you got a chance to get updated on that last session. But you'll recall that this is a pattern followed by most major metropolitan areas, of peaking in 1960, the suburbanization process, and then the repopulation of the city. The repopulation of the city really in the 1990s were new Americans and new populations moving into existing houses on the west side of Salt Lake City. The new population growth since 2010 has been new population moving into new housing that you have all been watching. These, we did several products that we want to make sure you know about. One of them has to do with population estimates that we do for you every year based on building permit data, down to census tract level, population, housing units, households, group quarters. And you can see the areas of the city that have gained population from 2010 through 2018. This is work that we have done for you as a city. Also, just the basics of the population age distribution, where we've got young folks on the bottom and older folks on the top, 5-year age groups, males on the left, females on the right. And you can see to the right the really domination of young adults in the Salt Lake City population. So part of these are people who cycle through town, come in, go to the university, leave, but now more and more, they're young professionals moving into this new housing. Will they stick? Will they stay? Will they age? But we have compared to the state, fewer kids, fewer family-age people, and fewer elders, and this really large young population. So not only are we a city of renters now, we're a city of young adults. Our diverse populations continue to increase over time. We obviously, I know you know, we have large swaths of the city, particularly the west side of the city, that is minority majority. If we look at changes in the minority share of the population, this is looking at this change atlas right here based on ACS data. Caveat, we are a long ways off from our last real count of people in 2010. So we'll get a much better picture once we get a good enumeration in 2020 coming up very soon. But big takeaway for you here is declines in minority populations in District 5 and increases in District 6. We look at Hispanic populations and we see declines in those populations. We think, well, we were just talking with Anna the councilwoman, prior to the meeting. When we're looking at the participation and estimates of our Hispanic populations and some of our new American populations, we don't know whether people are actually answering these surveys, or if they are, if they're so afraid that they're saying, you know, I'm here, but I'm not going to tell you about the other 4 or 5 people who are living with me, or whether it's actually gentrification and housing prices that are pushing people out. But we do see this particularly on the...
Absolutely, Councilmember Mendenhall.
Pam, that's really fascinating. Now, I heard you right. Decline in District 5, increase in District 6. And it would seem like if it were, you know, the national climate and the hostility and the fear that that places on so many populations, that we would see declines across the city if that were influencing it, not necessarily an increase.
Well, but we have migrations of Asians coming to Utah now. That's our main source region in Utah and nationally. Think tech, think university, think biomedical.
I thought I heard you just
minority
address Latino,
yes,
Latinx.
Yes.
But you're talking broadly about...
So this picture is for all minorities, of which Hispanics are part, but also Asians, Blacks, Native Hawaiian, Pacific Islanders, Native Alaskan, Native American. So that's what this picture shows you. But just, it was just an aside that we had spoken prior to the meeting where we're really focusing on Hispanics. So we're seeing we're actually seeing increases in Hispanics, but a rearrangement of them geographically. But we're really seeing the new people come are Asians. And it has to do with the change in the composition of the economy and prices of housing. But again, the mosaic is a little blurry. We need that 2020 data. Anyway, to wrap up, just want to remind you that we are your demographic team. This is on our website at the Gardner Policy Institute. You look at the bottom line there, we have a Census 2000 atlas. We began there. We did a change atlas from 2000 to 2010. We have a 2010 atlas. And then since we've been able to, since we've been in the Gardner Policy Institute, we do one of these beautiful atlases for you every year. One year we'll do the cross-section and say this is the picture with the new data, and the next year we do changes. This is a change atlas that shows you how the neighborhoods have changed across time. You'll also see we have a housing component that we've been funding out of this appropriation that you've given to us. You heard from the housing team last week, so that last year's was on the apartment boom. And then we have a dedicated staff who does the new population estimates every year based on building permit data, and an additional recurring product. This is for your EEO compliance, and it's a change in the race and ethnic composition of the labor force in the greater Wasatch Front metropolitan area, which is, this could actually be used by any governmental, any government that is part of the Wasatch Front. So you're actually providing a public good. I'm not sure people know about it, but Salt Lake County could be using this. Weber County could be using it.
Can you let the state legislature know that?
They don't always listen to me. Okay, now I'm going to step aside and let Emily.
I can just move this over here.
Okay.
You don't have to move. Hopefully this will just.
Whoops. Whoops.
I don't know.
That came
Does
unplugged.
that do anything?
No,
Yeah.
it's just the,
Yeah, you need to come
Oh.
over here.
You need it back. I'm sorry.
it's okay.
We'll just put it over here. I'm gonna give you these. I'm just gonna move them over.
Shift.
Okay.
There you go.
Thanks. I'll take this water. Hi. So let's talk about migration. So we just came out with a paper. You all got a copy of the brief. It's quite lengthy because there's just so much to talk about. But I'm just going to try to break it down just in a general picture about the state and Salt Lake County. And then if you guys have more specific questions, please just feel free to jump in and ask. So migration, it's just the movement of people from one place to another, and that can vary by geography. So when people say migration, some people immediately think international, some people think across state lines. We focus a lot on county-to-county migration. It's one of the main demographic forces that impacts population change. So we have births, we have deaths, and then we have the movement of people. So people move in and they move out. And migration in particular is super volatile. It is really impacted by economic conditions, and especially when you're looking at state to state or county to county, there's a lot of movement going on. In one year, you might see an influx of people moving into an area, and the next year you might see a negative number of people moving out. So it's not something that is just stable across a long period of time. And it's really hard to measure and study, which is why you don't hear people come out with hard numbers or data about it, because it's really almost impossible to track people's movements everywhere they go, because people move a lot. We focus mostly on net migration, which is basically the difference between the number of people moving in and the number of people moving out. So if you have more people moving in than moving out, you have net in migration. If there are more people that are leaving than are coming in, you have net out migration. So this is just a map showing where young adults are moving. This came out of Brookings, and you can see really a lot of people are moving. The blue is net in migration. So you see a lot of people moving into the west and the south, and a lot of people are leaving the East Coast and Midwest. And you can see Salt Lake City on there is a hub of net in migration for young adults. So Utah specific, 1 in 6 Utahns changed residences over the last year according to ACS data. Utah is rapidly growing, we all know that, and migration's impact really varies. So you can see on this figure, we have components of change. So the gray is net migration. The red is natural increase, so births minus deaths. Utah has really high fertility, so natural increase is always pretty high. You can see natural increase over time there's a slope going up and then it starts going down, but net migration is all over the place. And really what you can see here is that you have recessions, people leave or just stop moving at all. You have kind of the buildup to the Great Recession around 2004, 5, and 6, and then it just crashes. People just stop moving completely. And really in the last few years, we've had a lot of people moving in to the state. It's been pretty consistently in the mid-20,000s, and that's significant growth. So our paper focuses on Utah's migration history over the last 50 years, and then we look at the county picture and how does that vary by age. Because it's one thing to know how many people are moving in, but what is the makeup of the people that are moving in? So we look at age-specific migration rates for all the different counties and over time. So this graph has a lot of lines on it. This is the net migration rates for Utah going back 50 years. So on the bottom, we have 5-year age categories, and on the left, we have a net migration rate. So you see a dotted line along 0. So if you see a line below 0, that means net out-migration for that age group. So you can see pretty consistently in that giant peak, that's Utah's 20 to 24 age group. And really what we can see along here is the gold lines, the dotted lines are before 1970. There wasn't a lot of transportation coming in and out of Utah. The economy was really specialized, really susceptible to booms and busts. And then once 1970 hit, which is the bright red line, just Utah kind of changed. The West kind of changed. You had technological innovations, completion of highway systems that really aided a lot of the transportation and movement of people and goods. 1980s, the dark red line, there was a big recession there. That's the only decade in the last 50 years where we had only natural increase as our component of growth. And then the black line is where we are currently today. So you can see we've had a pretty consistent run over the last 3 decades of just a lot of people moving in, really net immigration of all age groups, but a really high spike in the young, kind of university-aged and young adults. So what we did was we have all of that data for all of the counties. So we decided to create county typologies based on migration and also economic conditions, because the economy and migration are so intertwined, they really have a reciprocal relationship. So you can see here we created typologies based on, we have coal country, so it's Carbon and Emery County, college counties, iron, sand, peat, cash, oil and gas. We have ring counties. We created a lot of different things. I'm not going to go into all of them for this. And these are just based on the age-specific rates and then economic and demographic similarities. So the typology we created, large metro, is basically just Salt Lake County, because really there's no other county like Salt Lake in Utah. It's the economic hub of the state, and really it has net in-migration for about 15 to 19-year-olds through 30 to 34, and then net out-migration for almost every other age group. So that's great. So if you look at the population pyramid, you can see for Salt Lake County, you see the wide kind of waist, which is the young adult, working age. A lot of people maybe come here for university and they stay, and then you have more people moving in of that age group. But then you can really see kind of around those, you have less people, whether that's kind of in the teenage years and then also kind of in the older adult ages. And a lot of that just has to do with amenities, right? What young people want, what they want to be around. And really what we're finding, especially with this data, is if you look at what we call the ring counties, these are, you know, the counties surrounding Salt Lake County, basically. So we have Box Elder, Davis, Tooele, Wasatch, Morgan. You see that their signature migration is basically the opposite of Salt Lake County. They basically have family-age people moving in. And what we think is happening is a lot of people are moving out of Salt Lake County and moving into these other areas once they start families, get a little bit older, cheaper housing, better education, more family-friendly environment. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, but there are just different local conditions that counties have that attract different kinds of people. So then if you break down, looking at all of the counties' net migration rates for these different age groups, it's kind of helpful to see a state level picture. So we created life stage migration age groups. So we have emerging adults, which is 15 to 24. It's usually about college age, coming out of their family house, kind of starting an independent household, college, work, whatever. Young adults, 25 to 29, that's basically coming out of college and getting their first job. Family age, we see parents, ages 30 to 49, and then their children who move with them, ages 5 to 14, and then older adults. So this is just a map of the young adult net migration rates across the entire state. So what you can really see is most counties are exporting their young adults and they're sending them to a select few counties. So you have Utah County, there's the Missionary Training Center, there's BYU, there's UVU. Salt Lake County is next in terms of the highest net in-migration rate for that age group. And then Washington County and Weber are also pretty close. What's interesting is if you look at the migration for family age, it's basically the exact opposite. Most counties are attracting a lot of family age people, except for Salt Lake and Cache. Those are the only two counties in the state, according to this data, that are having a net out migration of that age group. So again, there are pros and cons to having a lot of migration of a certain age group, but these patterns are just really interesting to look at if you want to take a look at your area and think, what about this county is attracting these kinds of people, and what about this county maybe isn't meeting the needs of other populations?
So we have a question from Councilmember Mendenhall.
Yeah, Emily, how does this compare over the last decade or two? Is it a new thing for Salt Lake County that we are losing families compared to other counties in the state?
Not necessarily. So I actually have the slide here. So we put these profiles together at the end of the document. But for Salt Lake County, you can really see they've always been an attraction for young working adults. The black line is always going to be 2000 to 2010. So it really hasn't changed too much, but you can kind of see, way early on, maybe up to 1970 or 1980, you were getting low but still net in-migration of other age groups. But really over the last couple decades, it's been pretty consistent. There's just been more development in more areas. People first started moving north, and now people are starting to move south instead. And now at this point, there's just kind of a saturation in Salt Lake County, and people are just finding other places to move. Did that answer your question? Okay. So why does it matter? Basic Utah demographic history and literacy is important. It's important to understand the changes that are not only happening over the last decade, but in the last few decades. Is this something that's always been happening? Is there, maybe some kind of event that triggered something that brought a lot of people in or have started to export people? So it's important to think critically about that. And it's important to understand migration motivations and the impacts it has, because it's important for planning. People make many decisions in why they move, and most places can look at their local environment and talk to their constituents and find the reasons why people decide to stay or decide to leave. So yeah, counties can, to an extent, keep or change these patterns if they want. And so there are definitely certain benefits and drawbacks of having, certain age groups stockpiled into an area. Washington County is a really interesting example. Everyone thinks of them as this retirement destination, lots of elderly people, which is true, but what we're finding over the last 10 years is they've really started to build this economy that's now able to support more than just a retirement age population. So it's interesting to see how certain counties are able to target different policies and change if they want to. And so this was one migration paper that we've done, and we are anticipating doing a couple more. Next, we're going to be looking at characteristics of Utah migrants. So age, sex, race, educational attainment, labor force participation. What do the people who are moving here really look like? And then we want to look at origins and destinations. So where are people coming from? And what ages are they? And then where are also people who are deciding to leave Utah, where are they going? So that's what we have in a nutshell for migration. Tried to keep it brief. And then this is just a table summarizing kind of the life stage migration and how that compares with the county typologies. And basically who they migrate in and out for their different age groups. So.
Great. Questions? Councilmember Mendenhall?
Emily, will you go back to that last slide, actually?
Yes.
Not that one. Yeah, that one. And looking at the life stage migration, I guess I'm wondering if your research gives indications of the driving factors that move people. And I know education with that certain emerging adult or young adult stage is an obvious one. But aside from that age demographic, what is moving people when we are in a stable economy as we have been for several years? Is it home size and additions of children? Is it the loss of the number of people in a home and wanting to downsize, or is it really an economic and or cultural conversation that's happening? And do you have any data that we can learn from about that?
So there's a lot of literature that looks at, if you look at these different life stages, you know, all of those things, right? No one makes a decision based on, well, a lot of people don't make a decision based on one thing. There are a lot of different things that go into those decisions. So like for a retirement age person, for example, you know, favorable tax policies. A lot of people like to move somewhere that's warmer. They want to move somewhere with favorable climate, where there's amenities for their local population, a lot of tourism-related things as well, recreational opportunities. I mean, when it comes to family age, it's a lot of the things you mentioned, whether it's lower crime, cheaper housing, better educational opportunities for their kids. I mean, people want, you know, houses and yards. Do you want to add?
Yeah, and then of course there's the cultural element. People, there are cultural enclaves. Of course, we know here in Utah we have Mormon enclaves, and we certainly see that in our data. Places in the county that have very large household sizes, like in West Valley City and Kearns, and then in the southwest part of the valley are either ethnic enclaves of the Mormon type of ethnic enclave or of international New American enclaves. So that's a factor too in where people move. And then there's the life course migration where, you know, people may have left Utah 20 years ago when there wasn't much in the way of economic opportunity, moved to Chicago, and then they retire and they want to move back home where their kids and grandkids are. So if you think of that whole mix, and then you think of how Salt Lake City itself has really changed over time, how we, as part of this really large international, globally connected metropolitan area. Remember, we're projecting that Salt Lake City greater metropolitan area in 50 years becomes the size of the current Seattle-Tacoma metropolitan area. And I went through there in May to pick up my custom camper, and it's pretty awesome. Another story for another day. But it took 4 hours for us to drive across that metropolitan area. So Salt Lake City now plays this really important role, and we've not talked about this today, but obviously our daytime population is very different than our nighttime population, and we have temporary population here, people who come for conventions and for business. So on any given day, during the day, the population is double and sometimes more than double the residential population, and the demographic and economic and socioeconomic characteristics of those folks are very different than the nighttime population. But the nighttime population also has, and this is not even counting Airbnbs, you know, people who are here on business with the university or corporate or whatever. So when we've talked about only just actually a fraction of the people in the city, but if we look at Salt Lake City and its role within this larger regional economy, all of this new housing that's going in and attracting young adults, this is what happens in big cities, right? They densify, they change. If housing policy is population location policy, and probably the best way to keep your kids close to you is to have some affordable housing, in the neighborhood. So it's such a fascinating place to study as it's changed over time. And then, of course, we've got the great diversity that is Salt Lake City, our little island of blue in the sea of red. And all of the diversity along so many lines that you're an international city. What's happening to school enrollment? It's declining. We're having more and more people in the city who are either single or married with no kids, or living arrangements are very, very complex and different in Salt Lake City as compared to any other place in the state.
Councilmember Wharton and then Councilmember Johnston.
So with this emerging young adults population that is coming out of Salt Lake County, kind of going to the ring counties, are there other counties in the country that are like similar to Salt Lake, and do they experience that same pattern, and do they experience it at the same rate that we do? Do you know?
So this is not unique to Salt Lake. Any metropolitan area pretty much has this exact same issue. You have the economic core where people are moving in and having jobs, and a lot of them choose to stay in the state, but they'll move to the suburbs. The suburbanization is not unique to Salt Lake. It's just that Salt Lake is now becoming more of a metro area than it has been in the past, and now it's going to be really interesting to see with the next decennial census how this migration pattern changes, intensifies. It'll be really interesting, but this is not unique to Salt Lake.
That's this typology, large metropolitan county that we put Salt Lake County in. We learned from the literature, and there are many other areas where there's a large metro county. And what you see in that migration, those decadal migration rates that Emily was showing you, is that this is intensifying.
So is it it sounds like the pattern is normal, but is the rate similar or comparable, or are people leaving?
We looked at that.
Do you know about that?
We haven't compared Salt Lake to in terms of rates to other counties. We've looked at Utah compared to other states, especially in the Intermountain West, and it's pretty similar. Because Utah, again, pretty much mirrors Salt Lake County, except it is bumped up just a little bit. So it has net immigration of most age groups, but it still has that giant spike. So Colorado, Vegas, Arizona, who else is in there? Here we go. They all have, pretty much sharp spikes in that young adult age group. And then when you look at Arizona, they also have a pretty large retirement age population too because of the weather.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And the retirement migration is becoming more of an issue. And part of it, I think, is this return migration where people had to move off and now they're not working anymore and they can move back home from some of the big families that we have here. But you can see the uptick if you look at the picture on page 29, and Emily had it up here. There's an upward slope in the older age groups. So I think we can anticipate more retirement migration in Utah and in Salt Lake County in the decennial, my prediction.
Yeah, and if you think about the cohorts, the big cohorts right now, the baby boomers and the millennials, they're both overloading those two age groups a lot, and that's why we're seeing a lot of the young emerging adult population just moving around in general, and the same thing with the retirement age population. There's just simply more people that are in that age group at this point right now too.
But the older age groups, you have to remember, are about to enter into the ultimate migration. So once they're gone, the other populations and generations outnumber them. And actually we're already outnumbered and becoming more and more outnumbered every year because we're taking the ultimate migration.
Right. And I think a lot of them will end up in District 3. Because that is where the cemetery is. So, but the other question...
And they voted too, right, Chris?
It's a lively crowd. I had another actual question. Thanks a lot, James. All right, come back to me. Thank you.
This is a little outside of the scope of the migration study you're presenting to us today, but I'm interested in the demographics of folks in the city. Age is a big piece, obviously. If you project an in-migration of folks over the age of 55 or 60, that would be a huge policy implication for us, which, so that'd be question number one. Not just for the county, but for the city itself, for the housing and some of our parks. But parks are on my mind a lot because as a father of 2 kids but no pets, I feel like a minority, actually. I think we have more households with pets than kids at this point. And I don't think that a lot of our cities caught up to that.
Right.
And so I don't know if we have any data on those particular types of things with pets or family composition, those kind of things.
Well, family composition we do, and even if you look statewide, the iconic Utah household type, which is an opposite-sex married couple with kids, is 30% of households at the state level. Mm-hmm. And that's smaller still in Salt Lake City. I don't have the number on the top of my head. Mm-hmm. But yeah, we need to, where we're just talking about wanting to do some more research into household composition because that has so many implications, right, for the demand for housing. Yeah.
Affordability.
Well, and I think about the size of the housing, unit size, and those kind of things, but I also think about our infrastructure, about our sidewalks and our streets and our parks, and if we have more pets than kids, we're still building things for a certain type of household. And there could be a lot of change coming in how we build our physical infrastructure in the city to reflect the needs of who's living here or who will be living here in the years to come. So I don't have the answer yet, but that's been on my mind a lot.
And we also, just to remember, the people who use the city are not just the people who live here. We have this very, very unique role that we double our population during the day, and we have all of these temporary residents who come in to do business. You have a complicated job. Yeah.
Can you repeat what you just said about the 30% number statewide household?
The share of households statewide in Utah that are opposite-sex married couple with children is 30%.
Oh.
That's not the majority of households.
How about same-sex married couple?
Yeah.
Very small, and you probably know this, that in the 2000 census, anybody who answered that they were a same-sex married person, the Census Bureau recoded one of them to be the opposite gender.
Oh, wow.
So they disappeared from the data. 2010, I mean, this is the very first, actually, this is a really amazing and wonderful thing about Census 2020. For the very, very first time, people get to answer that they're family.
Don't tell the president that, because he'll undo it.
Oh, he won't listen to me.
Oh, yeah, don't tell him.
Don't ask, don't tell. Sorry, I couldn't resist.
Any other questions, Andrew? Chris, did you figure the last one out that I ruined it for you?
Thank you. And I remembered my question. Can you, the slide that you showed us with the racial migration during your part of the presentation, and I think you broke it down by community council district. Do we have a copy of that somewhere? And
Yes, it's in this.
Okay, great. And then do we have one that shows income?
Yes, in
Okay,
here.
great, thanks.
And if you can't find us, call us. Our big message to you today is we are your demographers. Use us. So as we were talking before the session today, you're required to know this much about this much. So if you find an area that you need more on, call us. We're here for you. We would love to help you dig data and do intensive studies of different areas or topics. We want to help you. Yeah.
Mr. Chair, can I jump in? Is there in here somewhere a little bit more forecasting for Salt Lake City population?
No. This is retrospective based on decennial data.
That's why it stops at 2018 on our little chart there.
Yeah.
Yes. And so projections are a kind of a big topic because a lot of the projections have to do with policies. right? So it's not like we know the future, we're creating the future. We do our projections at a county level. When you look at how that population gets distributed sub-county, we work with the metropolitan planning agencies, which are Wasatch Front Regional Council for us. But hopefully you've got, I don't know who you've got, community and your community and economic development people working with them, and with like Scott Feston and Andrew Gruber, when those projections are being developed, hopefully.
Yeah.
Yeah?
Bert Gramberg would be a good person to reach out to if you're looking for small area projections.
But whether or not those are actually credible, or who exactly was informing them, and that should be an interactive process. The city should be at the table when those projections are being made. And I'm sure they have been, I'm just not sure who. Cindy, do you know? Yeah.
Okay.
Councilmember Wharton.
Last question. You said that there was, you at the beginning of your presentation, data on LGBT Utahns. Is that in this, or is it in that book that you?
Well, the data is very sparse.
Yeah.
The 2010 census, I think, will be our first look.
Okay.
Where people will not be fearful to say, yes, I am married to a woman and we are family for the first time since 1790 that this is even possible. So, there are bright spots.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Yes. We'll know after the 2020 decennium.
You said 2010 was the first opportunity. Did you mean 2020?
2010, you could say you were a domestic partner. 2000, you were disappeared.
Okay.
They took one person and made them into a man or a woman, so that it was different. But this is the long political history of the census.
Yep.
It's never over.
So 2010.
We could, but not be married, but could be a same-sex domestic partner. So they're in there. But as far as orientation or identity, I mean, there's still just the binary male-female, right?
And 2020?
We can then, now in this one, two people of the same gender who are married can say, I am married to a woman, and we will not be considered roommates for the first time ever. We will be considered family.
Yeah, so same-sex partners were not considered a family household. They were considered a non-family, which would include like roommates, anything like that. So.
Right.
Councilmember Mendenhall.
Because this is such a revolutionary time for the census, and everyone in the country is going to be doing this work at the same time, we don't have the advantage of looking at necessarily what other cities are doing in order to really engage the populations that we know are difficult to reach and count in the census. But notwithstanding, do you have advice, or are you in contact with Haley, who the city's hired to do more of that engagement work, so that we can do the very best we possibly can at engaging these demographics?
Yes. Also, as a member of our demographic team is Mallory Bateman, and she is doing a lot of work at the state level with the governor's office and the Complete Count Committee, and our team is connected to the Census Bureau in multiple ways. And so since she knows Haley, they've connected. As far as developing a work plan for Haley, I think she's just been hired on, right? But Mallory's in contact with her, and there are known best practices. It basically boils down to finding the people who are hard to count, finding ways, you can answer online, you can answer by phone, you can answer by paper, you can answer in community centers, finding people within the communities to say, look, this is important that you answer, you're safe, your individual identity is not going to be disclosed. So it's a lot about all your community connections and getting people within the communities who are leaders, basically vouch for the process and say, this is important, you need to be counted. Mm-hmm. So she obviously is in a more coordination role at this point. But we're here to help as we can, and there are best practices that can inform what the city does. But we're talking, how many days?
100 and something.
172, I mean, tick, tick, tick.
It's gonna be here before you know it.
Chair, I have a question.
Councilmember Valdemoros.
Thank you. Along those lines, is there any chance or any way you can send us best practices as council members when we go out to our community councils to market the census and also tell our constituents why it's important?
We would love to. And I'll ask Mallory to be in touch with Cindy and get stuff to you, get information to you.
Because I understand
and
the
connect.
administration goes, and they've been doing such a good job. Like, I've been hearing about the census for a few months now, but it's also nice to have a council person to come tell you, this is why we need a census. And
Oh, yes.
some things that can resonate with people and they can make the click, and the things that we do, our job, and how them participating in the census can help us guide our
Yes,
our job.
yes, and I guess I was just assuming you would be doing that, and thank you for making it explicit.
Yeah, for
And
sure.
we're happy to help however we can, and I'll have Mallory Bateman
Great.
directly connect with Cindy. But we're available to you also.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Thank you both so much for your time. We really, really appreciate it. This is very, very informative. So.
Invite us back.
We will, for sure.
We're very, very honored to serve as the city's demographers, and really love doing the work, and it's great to see you face to face. Thank you.
Well, thank you for your great work.
Thank you.
Our next item is an ordinance, which is a zoning map amendment at 1937 South, 1200 East. Nick Tarbett will introduce this from the council office, as our policy analyst. And then Chris Lee is the principal planner, as well as John Anderson, who's our planning manager. They will be joining us at the table momentarily. All right, Nick.
While Bobby's pulling up the presentation, also the applicant is here and would like to speak at the conclusion of the briefing.
Great.
From
So
planning staff.
as soon as y'all are done, we will, as per our rules, the applicants will have 5 minutes to address the council.
PowerPoint, please.
Good evening. Thank you for having me here. This is the zoning map amendment, which is being sought from RMF 35 to RMF 45 at 1937 South, 1200 East. The applicant owns the adjacent parcel to the south of this one, and it is currently zoned RMF 45, and the petitioner is requesting the change to facilitate consolidation of the two parcels and then to do development on both of them. And with this, staff recommended approval, but the Planning Commission forwarded a negative recommendation. This is the location of 1937 South, 1200 East. It's in Sugar House, in a neighborhood that's got many diverse uses. It's adjacent to the Sugar House Business District. And as you can see here, the subject parcel is directly abutting the RMF 45 zone, and it's in the RMF 35 zone. This is another view of the area. This is looking down 1200 East towards the north from about 2100 South. You can see the existing development pattern there has a lot of multifamily housing, multifamily buildings, and the specific parcel is highlighted in red there on the left. The graphic on the right shows the density of the different housing projects that already exist there, the multifamily housing, excuse me. And it is designated in units per acre. And you can see the different numbers there show how many units per acre exist on different parcels. And the 34 surrounded by red is what would happen if the zoning change were permitted and they were to build out to the maximum amount of units on that parcel.
So a question for you.
Yes.
So, having read the staff report, what was the Planning Commission's debate? I mean, what was the issue that led them to go in a different direction from what staff recommended?
What it came down to, from what I observed, they were really set on the dividing line that was there. Just that it was established in the master plan, follows what's here. A division between those areas right there. And then also, there was a lot of talk. I mean, overall, the proposed design was well received. It sounded like we're okay with people being there, but there was a lot of pushback against cars, automobiles, having more parking issues, that kind of thing. So there was quite a bit of feedback as far as that went.
And this is kind of in our older master plans where we had a clear future land use map that had a line that separates this parcel's this and this parcel's that. We've kind of gone away from doing that, hoping to look at something, look at it more area-wise and looking at it a little more holistically. But they felt that line was put there purposely.
And based on the densities that are proposed, what the Sugar House Master Plan says right now, I believe that RMF 45 does qualify for the density that is proposed. But you can look at that a little bit more in depth in the staff report if you're interested in that. And then this specifically shows the subject parcel. It's that little blue house is 1937 South, 1200 East. And then the one right next to it, this is 1961 South, 1200 East. And this is the parcel that is currently owned by the applicant. It is overflow parking for the Irving Heights apartment building, which you see right there in the first photograph. And so they would like to knock down that house, get rid of those carports, consolidate those parcels, and then do a multifamily development on the resulting parcel. And then as far as zoning standard differences go, with RMF 35, the maximum height is 35 feet. Setbacks would be 20 feet for the front yard, 20% of the lot depth not to exceed 20 feet for the rear yard, and then 10 feet for side yards. RMF 45 is similar, except for the maximum height would be 45 feet. Setbacks are fairly similar, 20% lot depth not to exceed 25 feet in the front yard, and not to exceed 30 feet in the rear yard, and then 8 feet setbacks on each side. The biggest difference by far is the density. If these were consolidated as RMF 35 parcels, you could have a maximum amount of 10 units on the consolidated parcel, whereas if it was RMF 45, you would have 19 units. And the applicant has stated that the reason they are seeking RMF 45 is simply for the additional density. They don't want to go up to 45 feet in height. They only want to do 35 feet in height. And they've got some slides where they can show a little bit more about what they're proposing also. But that's an overview.
So if you could go back to the photos. So the 1961 South property is being used as overflow. Is it overflow parking for Irving
Heights?
Irving Heights.
Yes.
Okay. Was that parking? Was Irving Heights approved with that condition, or with the with parking on that site?
Yeah, and Irving Heights was built in 1963.
Okay.
And at that point, their parking requirement was only one unit or one parking stall per unit, regardless of the number of rooms. So they needed 63 parking stalls when it was built. From what I can do, the research that I've found, it looks like it was approved and it was built with more than 63 stalls on the parcel alone, without this parcel with the overflow parking. Sometime in the future, it looks like around 1969, the owners added additional parking for whatever reason, and they've just been using it as overflow parking for the building since then.
Okay, so this parking does not. I mean, you wouldn't eliminate the required parking from the Irving Heights development. This is just supplemental parking that was added. Okay.
Right.
Great. Thank you.
That's pretty much my presentation, if the applicant wants to add anything.
Okay.
Or if the council have any questions.
Yes, yes, of course.
Before we invite the applicants up, any questions?
I have one,
Councilmember Rogers.
and this is probably directed towards Councilmember Fowler. And I know this is probably outside of the area of the Sugar House land use district. It's not. Well, my question is, what did Judy Short say about this?
She provided it, well, I don't know exactly what Judy Short said, but they provided feedback, and it was a negative recommendation from the Sugar House land use. But if you look at they summarized it in our staff report a little bit, of what the positive and negatives were, and they're sort of, at least in the bullet points we have in our staff report, I mean, somewhat even of what you would think of people being on the fence about something like this. That I am aware of, I haven't received any emails on this either way, honestly.
Other questions? Councilmember Johnston.
I have a question related to the difference between the staff recommendation and the planning commission negative vote on this. One of the things you said was we've moved a little bit away from hard lines differentiating different zoning types, essentially. Tell me sort of where you moved to and how does that look? Because if that's part of the core issue here, help me understand that piece a little more.
Well, for example, if you take the West Side Master Plan, it has a future land use map, but it's focusing on like nodes, and this would be a regional node or a commercial zone or those sorts of things. So when in our past plans, that's not how we had written them. So I think that it is our job as planners to know that the neighborhoods are changing and evolving, and that a hard fast line isn't always going to be the right way to look at something. I think that we should really try and see what has changed since that point. The line is still there on the master plan, and so we did. I believe they're requesting to amend the master plan as well to move that line. So it's hard to compare the two because they were studied differently. So like the west side, where it's looking more nose at these that had the hard fast line. But I think it's always important for us to be looking at a neighborhood as a whole and not just focused on a line here or a line there. I also think this is one of these recommendations where it was with the request that I think we went back and forth a lot on trying to decide what we should be recommending to the Planning Commission. And I feel like the Planning Commission kind of had that same discussion where they could see some positive attributes, and there were some negative attributes brought up to the neighbors, which are primarily parking and traffic, which are the two things I think we all hear about the most in the city. And so we looked at that in policies, where we have policies saying we need more housing, policies that we want to make sure we have compatible design. And so I think we as staff were weighing those as well as the Planning Commission, and
so I guess
ended up with different recommendations.
I think the more detailed question would be, in Sugar House it's a little different because you already have quite a high density. You're moving and shifting towards a lower density area. And I mean, in terms of the residents per acre is similar, but the height may be very different in some ways here. So help me understand sort of how you would move. How would you do that, essentially, right? How do you transition both in height and density in a more clear way other than just a line? So I understand it.
It is hard. We are obviously outside of the Sugar House Business District, and it does become primarily single family just to the north and the west and the east. The type of housing that we're looking at, whether it's 35 or 45, I think is actually a pretty good transition from, if we go, for example, the Sugar House Business District, you can go up to 105 feet. And then you're transitioning down to our single family neighborhoods, which allow 28 feet. So the difference between, an RMF 40 to 35 and a single family residential is really pretty minimal in height. I think you're right in the saying, because zoning does work with lines, so we will have that zoning line somewhere. It's just, I think that when we want to look at a project and request, we do need to be, it would be very easy for us to just look at a master plan and say, the line's here, let's not even consider it. But I think that we wanted to look and see how has the neighborhood changed and evolved, and where are we? And considering new city policies that have been adopted by the council since this plan was adopted.
Councilmember Valdemoras.
I just have, I'm not sure if it's a question for you or for the applicant, but are there any affordable housing units? 1, 2, are they requesting a loan from Salt Lake City Hand Division for nope?
Not that I'm aware of,
Okay.
but you can ask them specifically when they come up.
Great. Any other questions? Okay, let's have the applicants join us at the table. And if you could each just introduce yourselves and tell us about your project.
My name is Ned Scanchi. I am the applicant.
My name is Darren Mono. I'm the architect.
So thank you for taking your time to meet with us tonight. We appreciate that. I can give a spiel or you can ask questions. Is there a preference?
How quick is your spiel?
It can be fast.
Yeah, do a quick spiel, and
Well,
then,
so
and then
I think
you'll spur our questions.
So I've been around Sugar House my whole life, and raised my family on Douglas Street. Now we're still living just a little bit east of there. But I think what we're seeing in Sugar House is we're getting more and more dense. And so my appeal tonight is essentially let's keep density in areas that are designed for density, where there's the amenities and the neighborhoods that support density. So this is an opportunity to take an area that's dense and just use it for more density rather than looking at other places and putting homes in different, up the hillside or other places. So that's my main appeal is we should do this area because it's keeping density where density belongs.
Okay, questions? Yeah, that was a very quick spiel.
So the question is, how many units are you proposing again? And then are there any affordable housing units out of those? Are these for sale or for rent? And the last one is, are you looking for a loan from hand and stuff like that?
So I guess what we'd call this is affordable by design.
Okay.
So we have a mix of units. We have studios, 1 bedrooms and 2 bedrooms with a total of 18 units.
Okay.
And our goal, to give you a little feedback, we did meet with Judy Short and the Community Council and Planning Commission. What we heard from them is, one, can we do some affordability? And so our goal was to make affordable by design. So instead of doing 12 townhomes here, we're doing some studio units, 1 bedroom and 2 bedrooms. The other element they talked about was parking, which we can get into a little bit later. But currently, well, I'll mention this. We're required to have 21 stalls on site. We have 32 stalls on site because we were listening to what they said and tried to redesign it based on that feedback. As far as a loan goes, we will be taking out a construction loan. Happy to look at a Salt Lake City or some type of loan. I'm not familiar with the programs enough at this point to speak to that.
Thank you.
But that's not part of the application, though.
Yep. Other questions? Councilmember Valdemorris, do you have one more?
No.
Can you hurry and think of a question? You look like you want to ask something. Okay, well, that was very quick. Anything else you want to share with us before?
I will just mention this slide. So under current zoning requirements, we can build this building here, which would be a 45-foot building on one lot and a 35 building on the other lot. So that's what can be done. We feel like this building activates the street better. We pull the parking to the back side and really just makes that streetscape along 1200 East better.
And design-wise, the goal is to break down the mass, so it's not one big apartment building, it's 2 separate structures, and it's kind of designed almost to look like townhouses, like smaller units with sort of vertical-oriented material transitions. And so we've really tried to transition from the Irving Heights building, which is a tall tower, to single-family residential, and hopefully this is accomplishing that. That was the intent.
Sorry.
Councilmember Fowler.
We had a small group meeting with you, and will you remind me if there wasn't the rezone, how many units you'd be able to get in there? I thought it was like 9 or something, 9 or 10 or something like
It
that.
was
Is that right?
10 units is the max we could get.
And so just by going up, allowing that 10 more feet, we almost double. And in fact, I think you could maximum go up a little bit more, right, under the zoning ordinance. But just the way this is laid out, I mean, we almost double the density in just a little bit more feet, right? And so for me, I think this is great. I think it is a good transition, and to Andrew's point, that somewhere there has to be a line saying this is how zoning works, right? I guess there has to be a line. I mean, some places there isn't a line, Minneapolis, right? But we currently operate under having a line somewhere, and I think that this is a nice transition from into that other single-family area, right? And allows the density, but hopefully in such a way, I know it's not a home ownership project, but in such a way that it feels as if it is, right? And I think that's some of the neighborhood worry, is if it's just renters coming in and out, but the way these look and feel and the design, I think and hope it'll be one of those where people want to stay a little bit more long-term.
Councilmember Mendenhall.
Yeah, I think the bubble popped a long time ago on this block, even by itself, and the color-coded zoning map that our planners had up before allude to that. But I always like to go to the Google satellite image, and when you stroll up the street on Google, you see that there's, 2 or 3 houses north, and then there's another apartment complex. And it looks like it's one that's been there for decades. And then right behind it, there's some more. So it's not, I'm not sure that the edge wasn't actually a couple houses north of here already, with construction that happened before any of us were born.
Thank you. Councilmember Johnston.
This is just for my personal interest. When you say affordable by design, you mean size of the units. Give me a sense of what a studio and one bedroom may go for when it's completed.
Well, we think that, so right now, a one bedroom in Sugar House is over $1,000. So we think we can land with a studio at $750 to $800. And so we'll have 6 studios here. Yeah, I mean, the alternative is to build under current zoning, which the building is essentially the same size, but the units will be bigger and therefore more expensive. So anyway, I know $800 for a studio may sound like a lot, but that's less than you find elsewhere in Sugar House.
Councilmember Fowler and then Councilmember Wharton.
I was just going to say it is what it is. I mean,
Yeah.
There's nowhere in Sugar House right now that's really that affordable. And unfortunately, I mean, right, and I think to Anna's point earlier, and I don't want to speak for Anna, but if you were seeking a loan from the city or from RDA, for example, if this was an RDA area, then that would probably be one of our requirements, right? More often than not, it's that affordability in order to give you any sort of assistance. Unfortunately, I almost was like, oh, $750 for a studio? Oh my gosh, that's great. Because there's a lot of studios in Sugar House that are a lot more than that. So I'm jaded.
Councilmember Wharton.
The house that is there any, did I hear it was built in the 30s? Is there any historic significance?
It's not on the historic register currently. So I guess I can't speak to that.
You know what year it was built?
We would have to research
We
that.
can find out, and I'll let you know.
Thanks.
Just an odd, more of an odd curiosity. So Darren, were you on the planning commission when this was voted?
It was not.
Okay. Okay, I was just
But
curious.
inspired him to join the commission. No, maybe.
Okay, if there are no further questions, we'll excuse you. Thank you both for your answers and the presentation. And we will be, we're set to accept public comment on the 12th of November with tentative council action on November 19th.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. The next item on our agenda is an ordinance budget amendment number 1 for fiscal year 2019 and 20. It's follow-up discussion. Ben Lutke from the council office, he's our policy analyst, will introduce this item. And then Mary Beth Thompson, our city's chief financial officer, and John Vike, the city budget director, will also join us at the table.
Just a quick update on 3 items, Mr. Chair. This is the 3rd briefing for budget amendment number 1. The council is scheduled to vote tonight. The first update is related to item A2, the open space property purchase. When the item was last before the council, the requested impact fee funding using parks was not available. $3 million was requested, less than $3 million was available. Since then, updated numbers have come in with additional revenue, and it's $3.7 million in parks impact fees is available. The council previously contemplated using $1 million from the surplus land fund, $2 million in parks impact fees, and $1 million from public utilities, stormwater, riparian corridor. Given the increased parks impact fees balance, staff wants to confirm that the council prefers to use the $3 million from parks impact fees and not use any funding from the surplus land fund.
Okay, does that make sense? Let's straw poll this just to be clear, that we will use the amount from parks impact fees as opposed to surplus lands. Thumbs up that we support that, some thumbs down that we oppose it. That is unanimous.
Okay. The other update is related to item A3, the school crossing guards moving to a contract approach. The winning bidder from the RFP back in April has agreed to maintain the same pricing beyond the 90-day period that was originally agreed. So if the council funds this item, it will not need to go through a second RFP, which will result in a faster implementation.
Great.
There's also a policy question, two policy questions. There are 90 school crossings that do not currently have crossing guards. The council expressed interest in adding additional guards. So question one, does the council want to add funding beyond the $110,000 that is currently requested by the administration? I know $50,000 was previously mentioned. That would likely add several locations with crossing guards. Alternatively, or the council could ask the administration to provide a report on the prioritization and costs for those 90 locations that don't have crossing guards.
So a question that I have we talked to the to the vendor about the addition of those additional crossing guards? Do they have the capacity currently to bring new people on? And if so, would that be done at the same cost or at the same pricing that we're currently paying for?
I do not know the answer to that.
Okay. Cindy?
I think maybe just to keep legislative and executive separate, maybe you could just think of it in terms of you're providing funding with this intent and limit the funding to that use, and then ask for what it is that they would plan to do. So that way you don't have to get into the timing of the contract or anything like that. You can just express your policy plan to make this money available to add crossing guards and not allow the money to be used for other things. That might be less cumbersome for the administration and for you guys.
Okay.
Just a thought.
So to throw an idea out there then, so we have discussed this in the past. Let's straw poll adding an additional $50,000 that we will make contingent on that money can only be spent on additional crossing guards. And then we will have the administration work with the vendor and come back and let us know which of those locations would be prioritized.
Mr. Chair, may I ask a clarifying question?
Correct, or yes.
Probably won't upend this at all, but I feel like I have to ask.
Yeah.
Why is the city sort of solely responsible for the crossing guards versus anybody else we could partner with?
Well, that's one of the things that would be my the second point that I was actually going to talk about.
Okay.
Which is that
I withdraw my question.
No, because it's actually a very good question, and I know that traditionally the city has been responsible for crossing guards. I have personally questioned why that is the case, and have always felt that we'd be able to do more if we had a direct partnership with the school district.
Is this true elsewhere as well in the state, I guess? I don't know the context.
I don't know. I don't know that question.
Sorry.
I just know that in the city, that's how we've always done it. And so my thought would be that we do $50,000 for additional crossing guards and do that as a matching and ask the school district to also pay $50,000 so that we could then cover twice as many of these areas. Councilmember Mendenhall.
Do we know approximately how many additional crossings 50,000 would cover?
This is an assumption based on the price that was estimated from the RFP, and that price could certainly change per crossing, which is about $7,700 per crossing.
Per year, fiscal year?
Per fiscal year, and that's for the 9 months of the school year. So that would give you an additional 7 crossings.
A long ways to go.
Yep.
Well, it would give us 14, right, if there's a match?
If the school district matches.
Correct.
So that would be the intent, that we would have 50, that the council would appropriate an additional $50,000 contingent on the school district matching that same amount. Thumbs up, or any further questions or discussion to this?
Is this two
Cindy?
sets of $50,000 or one contingent on both things?
One contingent on both.
Thank you.
Yes. Councilmember Mendenhall.
I would just support doing the 50,000 and recognizing that it's 7 out of 90, and then encourage or ask that the administration work with the school district on future crossing funding being a match. And that's a big bite out of an apple that they've never taken a bite out of.
Yes.
Here in the school district. I walk my kids to school and it's scary.
Yep.
When there's not enough crossing guards.
Yeah, I feel that same way too. I think it's a lot to ask suddenly to take that big bite.
Well, I don't think it's a sudden ask. I know that I've raised this issue with school board members before, and I think my only hesitation on not doing that. Sure, I'd rather fund 7 additional crossings than not. But I also realize that if we just fund it, that will, then we'll just be kicking the can down the road. And so what I'd like to do is make it contingent, keep the contingency on this, understanding, and they understand as well that we have a long ways to go in order to really focus on school pedestrian safety, but that this is something that we will have to tackle together. And so I would encourage us to kind of stick with that matching thing or with the matching idea right now. See how that goes, and hopefully we can leverage the addition. If the school district is not interested, then I think we will have to revisit this, and we can do that at that point. Councilmember Johnston.
When would this go into effect, the funding, if we were to approve it? And the ramp up, give me a sense of when actual guards would be on the street if we were to fund this today and the match happen, all that.
I don't know when they would be available on the street, but the funding would be available immediately after the vote tonight.
Theoretically, it's a ramp up
But
time.
the reality is that it's taken since April in order to for the vendor to staff up in order to do this. So I mean, there still will be a process that they're going to have to go through. So it's not like we'd be able to immediately have these 7 spots tomorrow.
I'm just bringing this up because I'm thinking forward, depending on what the school district decides. If they decide not to fund it, they can't fund it, and it comes back to us, we're missing a first semester essentially till after the Christmas break to have crossing guards. Would this hurt anything at all to come and revisit it, say November, if the school board says no, and then we could revisit it again without losing the full school year?
I don't think so, but what's your thought?
I was going to add, we have received budget amendment number 2, and it is scheduled for a briefing October 15th. So there will be a budget amendment open that the council could add this item to revisit over the next 2 months.
I think I'd just request maybe if we're going to talk to the school district sooner than later and figure out from their end if they could make a decision what that would look like.
I think that makes a lot of sense, and I do think that having this contingency will at least incentivize them to speed up their process, hopefully, and then because I agree, I don't want to wait any longer than we absolutely have to, but I also realize that. Changing the status quo is going to be it's going to be hard anyway, and if we're willing to continue to fund it alone, it would be very easy for them to let us continue to do that. And we can, and we would do that. We would just, not be able to provide as many stops as we would if we had the partnership. Yep.
Before we vote, are we doing a straw poll?
Yeah.
That if the straw poll passes and we approve the budget amendment without the $50,000 tonight, Mr. Chair, could you draft a letter to the school board explaining that we have a desire to see more crossing guards
Yes.
in the system, and we would like to begin this discussion in earnest with them?
Absolutely, and that is consistent with the meeting that we just had with the school board leadership. And so, again, if the straw poll passes and we add this tonight, we would be approving the funding tonight for the $50,000. It would just be contingent on theirs. So it's not like we would be waiting to refund it or to fund it later. Does that make sense? We'd be funding it tonight, but there would be the contingency that we'd be placing on it.
Mr. Chair?
Councilmember Jones. See, there you go. Councilmember Rogers.
Yeah, I was just going to say that for me, this establishes a good precedence for a good working relationship with the school district. When we're going to pony up 50%, they're going to pony up 50%. It just established a great precedence moving forward because for the protection of our children, I don't feel like the crossing guards are enough. I still think we need the reader boards in front of schools to identify speed limits, and I just think that this is a great opportunity for us to start it off. And they've agreed to it.
Councilmember Fowler.
They've been consistently with it.
Did Andrew want to say something? I zoned out. I also think, sorry, that this, the school board and school district have, and I'm coming sort of from an RDA perspective, but has questioned what our projects have done and do for them, and we've taken that seriously and saying, how are we going to create projects that benefit them? And I think that is part of this partnership, right? And we're being asked to do a lot in order to have some projects, and I think that it's a good thing to say we want you to step up a little bit as well to help this. And so I'm in support of this type of, and I know that they are in support, and I appreciate their feedback. I'm certainly not saying anything about the school board and their feedback to RDA districts or having, creating our project areas. I'm just simply saying this is what a partnership looks like, is saying, okay, we're happy to look at what we're doing to benefit or how we can benefit you and address your concerns, y vice versa. So, I know, I can't say it in English. I can only say it in Spanish.
That was impressive. So, I also want to say that there's often a misunderstanding of what the roles of the city council, what the roles of the mayor, and what the roles of the school board and superintendent are. And I think a lot of times people tend to merge those together or assume that we have, that the city has authority that we do not have. I think this fits along the lines of maintaining the two very different responsibilities that we as a Salt Lake City Council has, and they as a school board will have. But it allows for the creation of a working relationship and tackling something that has been ignored for far too long, in my opinion. Councilmember Mendenhall.
I just got a crazy idea. We should have adopt a crosswalk opportunities for developments that come up in the area and increase density or businesses in the community. It's not $7,700 a year. It's a lot when we're talking about 90 additional needs. But with all the growth that we're experiencing, we should have some of that growth helping invest in pedestrian safety.
I like that idea a lot, and I think that through the RDA, that is one of those joint benefits that we can certainly talk about and work on. But again, this is something that we have never done before. We've never asked the school district to join us as a funding partner in something like this. And what I'd like to see not only is that this is successful, but that it creates a different way of us working together with the school board so that we can start finally tackling some of these things that we've been ignoring for a long time. Not this current makeup of council members, of course, but as a city. Okay, so back to the straw poll then, it would be that we would include $50,000 in the budget amendment tonight for additional crossing guards. It would be contingent on the school district coming back and matching that at the same amount at $50,000. All in favor, thumbs up, thumbs down that we oppose that. Okay. And then to Councilmember Mendenhall's request, we will draft a letter from me as the chair to the chair of the school board, spelling out what the action that we've taken tonight, the commitment that we've made, and encouraging them to sign on and to let us know if that's going to be a possibility before we move forward with budget amendment number 2. Clear? Yes, Councilmember Mendenhall.
That other follow-up that I don't know if I'm thinking, because we just had RDA of the interest rate reduction opportunities that we give and how we're going to be talking about some specific ideas. Perhaps that's one of the opportunities to, but also maybe through other loan opportunities through hand, or I'm just thinking about how we could propose or put that on the table for people coming to either get money or get a rezone that could sponsor crosswalks, that we explore that with the administration, including the redevelopment agency.
Great, thank you. Back to you, Ben.
Those are the only 2 updates. Staff will update the motion sheet for the vote tonight.
Great. All right, thank you very much. The next item is informational. It's an update and timeline for the city's 2020 to 2024 consolidated plan, guiding use of the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development funds. Ben, you stay at the table. Lainey, if you want to come forward, and Jennifer Schumann, also from hand. Bringing a whole team forward.
We have a team. We have an awesome team.
All right, Ben.
The administration has a presentation for the council, and this is a first check-in. A second check-in is envisioned later this year or early next year. And this is the 5-year consolidated plan that sets the objectives, the target areas that certain funding can be spent, and the objectives are what the applications each year when you review CDBG, ESG, home, and HOPWA federal grants. The objectives you set in the consolidated plan are what those applications advance. And so depending on what target areas and what objectives are in the plan has a big impact, a $25 to $35 million impact over 5 years. So this is one of the most significant funding sources from the federal government that the city receives, and it's the guiding policy document that determines how that funding is spent. There are several policy questions on page 2 of the staff report, and there are attachments with maps about the current areas that are eligible, as well as a map of RDA project areas and opportunity zones, given the RDA board and council's interest in trying to align multiple funding tools together. And I'll turn it over to the administration for the presentation.
Thank you, Ben. Thank you, Council Chair, Council members. And again, thank you, Ben, for all of the assistance in regards to getting us to this point and for participating directly on our internal stakeholder group meetings, and we'll talk about that a little bit more later. I also wanted to introduce our team and acknowledge the folks here with the hand team and with our consultant team. Jennifer Schumann, folks that are not in the room, Tony Milner, Dylan Hayes, Bailey White, Sienna Sheed, all have helped with getting things ready. And then Elaine Wiseman, our new capital planning manager, right here. And she'll be taking Jennifer's place as now I have Jennifer Schumann as my deputy. And then our consultant team, I have Muriel Sochimel and Benj Becker, and we have them here to help us with questions if you have them. But we are a big team, and we're mighty, and we're ready to take on the consolidated plan efforts. So we're here today seeking your direction, feedback, and guidance. There will be prompts in our presentation in orange for you to look at and provide your policy guidance and priority feedback. And then Jen's going to quickly go through this. I know we're tight on time, and we appreciate you fitting us in at the end of this work session. Just going through the process in hopes of leaving sufficient space for you all to ask questions. And as Ben mentioned, we'll be back in the coming months to revisit the topic. And I think that's going to be it for me, and we'll have, Jen has the controls.
And I believe there are hard copies of the presentation in your folders as well.
Thank you.
So thank you again for the opportunity to present today. The consolidated plan, that's a very loud microphone. The consolidated plan refers to 4 grants: Community Development Block Grant, Emergency Solutions Grant, the Home Investment Partnership Program, and Housing Opportunities for Persons with AIDS. As a recipient of these funds, every 5 years, Salt Lake City is required to submit a strategic plan that identifies needs that exist in our community, evaluate the service and funding gaps that exist, and determine a strategy on how the city will use these federal funds to address those challenges. So we work together to identify actionable goals and measurable outcomes. As we think about the needs in our community, there are several challenges that have continued to be on the forefront. I don't think anything on this slide or in your presentation listed for challenges is new. We recently heard more about the housing market from the Kem C. Gardner Policy Institute, and we'll certainly be incorporating this timely data into our plan. We have an aging housing population with an aging housing stock. Incomes are not keeping up with housing costs, and we're in the process of transitioning to a new homeless resource center model that is untried in this community. And we battle challenges with not only accessing housing, but maintaining housing. And lastly, transportation costs continue to rise, right? These are all challenges that I'm sure you are very familiar with and that you've heard from multiple folks in multiple spaces. Now, this list in no way identifies all of the challenges that exist in our community. But what we look to, and that's why we look to have a wide number of voices as we evaluate our community needs and the gaps that exist. So let's talk about what HUD calls the process, which doesn't really tell you a whole lot, but it really comes down to the who, what, where, when, why, how we came up with the goals and the strategies that we move forward. So I wanted to start briefly with a timeline. HAND staff has actually been working on collecting data and educating our nonprofit partners for probably about a year. But in June, we kicked off this project effort. Using our consultant team, we have pulled together internal and external stakeholders, and we launched a community-wide survey. That survey, and I believe actually you guys helped us get that survey out to our community, and we could see that when you did that, our responses increased significantly. So thank you for participating in that. I won't go through all of the details. There's a lot of words on this slide, but we've been working really hard at collecting data. Last month, we also did a briefing to the Planning Commission to provide an overview to them as well, and we'll be taking the plan back to them in draft form, looking for a recommendation. Currently, we're wrapping up public engagement and moving into heavy data analysis, really pulling in a lot of different data points, helping us establish kind of those goals or be able to talk about the goals. We look at an analysis of impediments to fair housing, we look at market data, and then of course bring in those needs of not only the city as an organization and entity, but also our nonprofit partners.
Jen, can I interrupt you real quick?
Absolutely.
In pulling together all of this data from the community and from the partners and all of the things you just mentioned, are you also evaluating how the consolidated plan from 2015 to 2019 went, and sort of using that also as a framework by which to evaluate what our goals should be for the 2020-2024 consolidated plan.
Yes, absolutely. I love all the year numbers, right? And they get kind of discombobulated in there. Yes, absolutely. There are certain goals that we are behind on, and very understandably, given our housing market. And what that tells us is that we need to think differently about how we deploy funds for housing. What we're seeing is that because incomes can't keep up with the rising housing costs, right? A family of 4 at 80% AMI is really looking for a house around $200,000. When have you last seen a house at that level, right? So then it becomes, the conversation changes, and then we talk about strategies, right? Like, what other strategies could we deploy to get the housing price point down low enough to where a family at 80% AMI could actually afford it, right? So yes, absolutely, we are looking at that.
And when you come back, I saw on one of our pages that the next briefing kind of will provide a little bit more of what the commitments are, right? And I know you're going to get to that slide because I jumped ahead.
It's all right, fair enough. It's getting late, right?
But I would encourage you, if you would, to kind of also include that analysis from the past consolidated, because I think we can learn a lot from the past, right? And I think it's important to evaluate that in order to look at what we need to do for the future. But I would like to see some of that data and some of, and probably a little more detailed than not, I'll be honest, because I don't want us to, one, be reinventing the wheel if we don't have to, and I don't want to be doing programs that aren't working. And I mean, all of this is about how do we really be fiscally responsible, and as we've said several times today during RDA and this meeting, how do we get the most bang for our buck? And we have a lot of bucks here, right? I mean, in reality, there's a lot of money here, and we should really be maximizing that to the fullest. So I would hope to see a pretty good analysis of what the programs were and where we need to change those, or how we can use that to analyze how we go forward with this.
We'll do absolutely, that. Yeah. And it's great to hear that now so that we can make sure we have that for you.
Thank you.
For sure. We also recognize that the challenges that we face in our community are not unique to Salt Lake City. They go across geographical boundaries, and so we are working with Salt Lake County. We're collaborating and coordinating with them in their efforts to receive feedback, and we will be incorporating those bits of information into our data analysis as well. Every municipality that receives any of these 4 grants are doing this exact same process at this exact same time. So it's really nice to be able to understand kind of where their priorities are going as well, and how we might align and partner with that in a strategic way. So the culmination of this is a really in-depth plan that needs to be submitted to HUD May 15th of 2020. May 15th, yes. And I'll talk a little bit more about that on the last slide as we talk about next steps.
Sorry, I'm going to ask another question. It was in our staff report, but it does interest me. How are we sort of, I mean, the question that is here, and maybe you can elaborate, is just aligning our consolidated plan with the tools the city already has, and are we sort of working with other departments and divisions, and for RDA, for example, of course, and saying, how do we come up, and this question sort of came up in RDA.
Love that it did.
Of how do we define target areas? Are we looking at, collaborating so that, again, we can maximize the funds that we do have and create the biggest impact for these areas and with these dollars?
I think we should just jump to that.
Okay, let's jump there.
I will state that in the internal technical advisory group that we assembled has representation from across the entire city, which includes RDA, transportation, streets, engineering, parks, mayor's office, council office, Ben's been there. So we are definitely working with what kind of projects do we have on the timeline, or looking forward, what kind of projects are going forward, what kind of investments is the city making, and how do we layer in these funds in a way that makes sense?
That makes me the most happy. I mean, I'm really tired today, so you can't see how happy I am, but I'm so happy to hear that.
I'm excited. So I also, just before we jump to our first question, I wanted to provide a highlight on how many participants we've had in our survey. We're incredibly excited about this. We've had over 2,000 responses, and then we were able to go to public events and gather additional information to the tune of about 1,100 folks. So we have been able to receive input from over 3,100 folks, and we will finish up, I think, pretty close to 3,600 by the time we're done. So we're very excited about being able to highlight that. So let's jump in and explore some of the eligible activities, which brings us to our first formal question of the presentation. We've looked at eligible activities and kind of grouped them into four areas: infrastructure, economic development, and then two housing ones, one for rental, one for home ownership. The question that we're posing here to the council is, what types of infrastructure and economic development activities and housing activities that you see in this list do you feel as a body should be considered for prioritization as we move forward?
Councilmember
Rogers?
Johnston.
Does it have to be on that list currently?
I mean, you can throw out other things, and we can absolutely identify whether or not they are eligible for federal funding.
Lighting. Street lighting, sidewalk lighting, pedestrian lighting.
Sure. Yes.
Maybe.
My short answer will be yes. My longer answer is there are some caveats, but yes.
I'll second that one.
Just a clarification question. You're thinking beyond just the public right-of-way on streets, but like urban trails as well, parks?
Yeah, I'm looking at the street improvements. It doesn't quite fit that because I'm thinking of more non-motor vehicle right-of-ways. So sidewalks, particularly trails, those kind of things. As we become much more diverse in our transportation and more dense, those areas are going to be more used, and that's why I'm wondering. The area it's come up for me is that a lot of this is based on feeling of safety, and we don't use these funds for public safety necessarily, but it could do a variety of things with increasing feelings of safety in certain areas of the city that could be developed more fully, and therefore help our housing stock, et cetera.
Great.
Councilmember Valdemoros, and then Councilmember Mendenhall.
I just have two comments on the economic development portion. I think the small business facade program that you guys have been doing has been very successful, and it's very efficient, despite all the requirements that it has, but I think it has a great impact. So I think I would like to see that happen in other areas of the city that might need it. What I don't know if we're lacking is a micro-enterprise loans. When we say micro-enterprise, I feel like there is a gap that the city is not meeting, which are the micro-loans that are not really available out there in other nonprofits. It's something that maybe we could be doing. So usually other nonprofits might do loans from $10,000 to $50,000, and then there's the $50,000 to $100,000 and more that's the gap, and then the banks will do the higher ones. But there's also an opportunity for the super micro loans that might be $1,000 or $5,000 that some predatory lending institutions might be doing for small business owners that maybe, and they charge higher rates on that maybe the city can do instead at a lower rate to help the small business with the micro enterprises. And then on the housing rental one, you have preserved existing units, and I think one of the things that we keep hearing from the community is displacement when we have new buildings that are replacing other units. And so these preserved existing units, would a program of such be eligible where we're helping with the displacement of those folks that now have to find somewhere else to live because they can no longer afford to live where they were because a new building is coming up and it's newer and it's more expensive? And I'm not sure, but that's something that I would be interested in.
When you say displacement, are you thinking eviction as well, or more about this building is being demolished so another one can be built?
Yeah, the second one.
Okay.
Because and I think Aaron and I have talked to, especially with the Crossroads urban folks, about them having a lot of clients or people that they know of that they live in certain apartment buildings that at the moment are affordable, but coming this new building, which it will be nicer and newer maybe, but they won't be able to afford the people that live there, so they're not being rehoused.
Understood. And we'll have to do some learning about how HUD eligibility would fit into this.
Will fit in here, okay.
But thank you for bringing that up. That's great.
Councilmember Mendenhall.
Well said, Councilmember Valdemoros. And in some of those conversations, we've heard the frustration that we provide loans almost every month to new development happening and nothing to help existing landlords and property owners maintain what is naturally occurring affordability. And we should be doing that in exchange for the continued affordability or some rate of it. So can I just tick through a few of the priorities that I would list on this? Under infrastructure, I think accessibility improvements, sidewalk improvements, and park improvements rise up as we're looking for street improvements and community buildings. I see other revenue streams coming in as opportunities there, and not other revenue streams for accessibility in parks, sidewalk improvements. On economic development, I like both of those. And then for housing, it's really the preservation line for both rental and owner occupied for me, and the community land trust. But on the top line, we're building rental units and building owner occupied housing. I wrote in my notes over the top of that ADU, and I would like to see the city do something like the Alley Flat initiative that is happening in Austin, Texas. And we don't have to get into what that looks like now, but I know that up at the University of Utah, the Ivory Prize was given to that nonprofit organization who,
did the work on it, yeah.
connects. It's so cool. And it would be amazing for us to be able to make ADUs easier to access and have a navigator. I would love to fund that, and I think it would apply to the build rental and build owner occupied housing.
That for sure. I know HUD has struggled with concepts of ADU, so I am going to do a lot of learning about what's happening in Austin to see if they're using federal funding in that space and how they're able to deploy that. It's always easier if someone else has done it and we can follow. Yeah.
Any other questions? Okay.
Fantastic. Thank you for that feedback. So to maximize impact and leverage, nope, I'm going to back up. Federal regulations require that infrastructure and economic development type activities can only occur in CDBG eligible census tracts. We've provided a map that delineates where these anticipated eligible areas are. I know it's a little challenging to see. I believe you also have a hard copy, and then they're provided electronically as well. To maximize impact and leverage resources, HUD requires that the city identify target areas for both of these types of activities. And this is where the council actually has a lot of flexibility. Target areas can be any size other than the full city. And there's the target area of Salt Lake City, right? There's no limit as to the number of target areas that a community can have. To give just two brief examples on how target areas were used in the current plan, and I know I saw it in the RDA board presentation, but I believe you also have the current map of the target areas. But in year 3, the council may recall that we realized that all ADA ramps in the target area that were eligible for federal support had been completed. And so we shifted funding to support sidewalk improvements. for the remainder of the plan. Additionally, we brought up the facade program. That's been incredibly impactful in the area to be able to target a very specific geographic area. We've been able to complete 41 projects. We have 5 in the pipeline and 12 to 13 more that we anticipate happening here soon. And I'm sure you've been able to drive around and see kind of some of those improvements: Fisher Brewery, Metzger Printing, Square Kitchen, Compost Market, the Maven, and Magnum Bikes, to name a few. So this is exactly why HUD is looking for target areas in each community. So we have 3 questions that we've posed here. How many target areas should we consider? Do we want static target areas that don't move over the 5-year period? Again, we have flexibility there. And does the council prefer that the target areas align with other investment strategies?
So here's what I'd like to do. With the questions that you've posed in the staff report, instead of us taking the time right now to answer those questions, what I'd like us to do is write our answers down, and then what we'll do is we'll schedule a follow-up.
That'd be great.
For this. So keep going through the informational introduction of what you have. And then for the responses, we'll come to our next meeting prepared with those answers.
Mr. Chair, if I may, I'm not going to answer the questions, but I do have an ask for just that.
Councilmember Fowler.
I think to help me answer these questions, it would be helpful to understand how the previous council before me that was here in the last consolidated era, if you will, came to their target areas. What criteria were used to create those target areas? Just some background information regarding those target areas would be helpful as I kind of move forward and see, were those good things? Do I agree with that? That kind of thing to help answer this. So in that follow-up, or as we continue, if we could get that information, that would be helpful for me, please.
Just as an anecdote, the prior city engineer, right when he left, one of the successes that he mentioned was that over half of the ADA ramp improvements in the target areas had been completed in the span of a few years. And so that's one of those impacts that residents can see in that target area instead of spreading out the ADA ramp improvements through multiple neighborhoods.
Sure, but I appreciate that, Ben, but I think too, if your target area is 4 blocks, then how successful are we in getting 8, potentially 16 ramps, right? I mean, and so I think that is something to look at as well. I want us to be successful, and that's why exactly that I want to see that information, because it will be helpful to see how big they were, how small they were, and what that impact for the neighborhood was. So if I could just get some background on that.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and we want to do this, I mean, because these are really, and first off, thank you very much for posing the questions and letting us think about it, because this is something that I think it's an incredible resource that we have. We just want to make sure that we're doing it the right way and that we have enough time to really think about it. So would you all be opposed, or not be opposed, but would you be willing, before we schedule the follow-up, to potentially work with, so our council staff will work with you in scheduling small group meetings for council members, so that we can better understand exactly what the nuances of all of these things are, because it's incredibly complicated, and but again, it really is a good opportunity. So if that would work, I think that would be a big help to all of us.
Happy to do so.
Okay. Yeah, Councilmember Valdemar.
And one more question to that. I would like to know what are the metrics of HUD to measure what's successful. Like what determines that a target area has been successful and therefore we need to move on to a next one? Or is HUD okay with having the same target area for a long time? Is there a time limit? Those questions, so that we can wrap our heads around which area we need to answer your questions and what areas we think might need.
You're going to love the easy answer to that.
Okay.
But we will certainly provide that information.
All right, the easy answer is Forever, doesn't matter, great.
Yeah, this is one area where we actually have some good flexibility, so it's really great. Yeah.
Okay.
So with that, we'll just finish up, right? The last couple of slides. So the next one, again, there's a question about prioritization. Here's where the heartstrings come in, right? So we're talking public service eligible activities here, and I've lumped them into 4 categories: homeless, health, youth, and adult services. Some of the activities under each of them may apply to several different categories, but especially under homeless, like I think there's one that's medical and dental health, right? So as long as you're income eligible, sure, you could access that, but in the past, we have targeted that towards the homeless population. So that's not to say that it can't be accessed by anybody else, but rather what we've done in the past. So this, again, is where it's very difficult every year when we look at applications. There's a lot more need than there are funds available for this segment of the grants. So we would love to have conversation about what types of public service activities you would like to see prioritized when we do those small group meetings and come back.
Great.
Mr.
So,
Chair, may I ask
Councilmember
quick question
Johnston.
on that one? On these particular services, public services at least, I'm not sure the council has a lot of information about the current system or things that are being offered by county, state, other nonprofits versus what's not, the gaps. Would there be any information to help inform about potential gaps you're seeing that the city may, if the city doesn't step in, they may be unfunded for anybody? I don't know if that'd be helpful or not for the council to know, but I know for me it's helpful to know where the gaps are to see if we could be most effective that way.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And that is something we heard quite a bit from our nonprofit partners that came to our external stakeholder group meetings. So we could definitely provide more information around that.
Thank you.
okay, so next steps. Plan is due May 15th of 2020. That's a hard deadline, so the question is, how do we get there? This team will be reconvening internal and external stakeholders. We'll be meeting with each of you in small groups to continue to inform the process. That coupled with the necessary data points that we need to collect per HUD's regulations will be evaluated as we craft a plan and help inform priority needs. In early January, we'd like to come back with a pretty solid draft plan of what we feel like the priorities would be and some suggested strategies on how we achieve the goals that have been identified. And again, it's a collaborative effort through the whole thing. We will be returning to the Planning Commission, again, to get a recommendation for the draft plan at that point. In March, we'll do a 30-day public comment period per HUD's regulations. And then in April, consistent with the normal typical CDBG process, you'll get the opportunity to approve a plan and appropriate the first year of funding for that plan. It then takes us a couple of weeks to pull together all the final documents and do a public-facing document and get that all ready to be submitted to HUD. So with that, thank you again for your time. I know it's a little short today, and I appreciate all the questions and conversation, and then the opportunity to have small group meetings as we move forward.
Great.
Is there anything you need from us?
I think we're good. Thank you so much for your detailed presentation, and we look forward to working with you on this plan.
Fantastic. Thank you.
Great. Okay, we have 3 board interviewees who are here. The first one is for Joe Jacoby with the Art Design Board. Joe, are you here? If you could just tell us about yourself and why you're interested in serving on the Art Design Board.
Yeah, hi, thanks for having me. Yes, my name's
Thanks
Joe.
for waiting.
Yeah, no problem. My name's Joe Jacoby. I run a architecture firm here in the city, Jacoby Architects. We mostly design public schools, specializing in education, special education and all that. I've been involved in a lot of public projects which have kind of a public art selection component to it. So I just think it's so critical to really scrutinize artwork that's going in this state and then this city. And so that was one reason I was really interested in this board, was just that critical process and in really selecting good artwork. You know, the city is known and becoming even more known for great artwork. So I wanted to be able to participate in that. And then overall, at running my own private practice, I just really want to be more involved in my community. So that's why I was really interested in this position.
Great.
So,
any questions for Mr. Jacoby?
Can I just say I really like your resume?
Oh, thanks.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Okay, so this information is for you as well as the two other applicants who will interview in just a minute. Your names will be on the consent agenda across the hall during our formal meeting. You don't need to worry about sticking around for that. But you're welcome to if you'd like. But thank you very much for your interest. Again, your resume looks great, and it's going to be really good to have you on the board. So, great. Hopefully, we made that pretty easy on you.
Yes, you did. Thanks so much.
Thank you. And then the next two applicants are both for the Housing Trust Fund Advisory Board. So. If you want to join us at the table together, that would be great. We have Paul Cherwich and Matthew Pauley. And Mr. Cherwich, we'll have you go first, and then Mr. Pauley will have you introduce yourself.
Thank
after.
you. Same question?
Same question.
Excellent.
Well, instead of serving on the Art Design Board, why are you interested in serving on the Housing Trust Fund Board? And do you like art? No.
I have been interested in civil support for most of my life. I have been involved in numerous charitable organizations that have focused on the downtrodden. I have been very active in my Episcopal church in activities that have focused on helping others. And I have extensive experience with the federal government and some of their plans, and a little bit with the state, but never with the city. And I thought this would be very interesting to have this exposure to what the city is trying to do with my past experiences in trying to help those that are disadvantaged. The affordable housing issue ties directly into the work I've done here with Catholic Community Services and the homeless people and what I did in Ogden. I was one of the movers in establishing the first homeless center that they had in Ogden. And so here I am, another opportunity, and I hope it can be of help.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Mr. Cherwich, for your willingness. You bring an incredible amount of experience, and I'm thrilled that you're finally going to be able to impart some of your experience and knowledge on the city. So,
thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Pauley.
Paul has way more experience than I do. I'm a licensed architect. I'm interested in this board because there's a need, and I can witness it every day living in the Fourth, and I see lots of individuals who I meet every day who are needing that support. And on a personal level also, my father is a partial quadriplegic, so disability housing is a big element for me. It's hard to find housing for those with disabilities, physical and mental. So that's why I'm here. I think this is something that I can do to help my community.
Great. Any questions or comments for either applicant? Okay. Thank you. Again, you'll be on the consent agenda across the hall. All right. Thanks for your willingness to serve. So that concludes the work that we have for our work session. Do we have any announcements from the executive director? No. We do not, and no new reports from the chair and vice chair. So we will we'll adjourn the work session, reconvene our formal meeting across the hall at 7:15. So if we could have somebody make an announcement across the hall that we will begin 15 minutes late, that would be appreciated.